Call it the world's double standards or yen diplomacy, because a very visible split was evident at a rare review of China's human rights record. A UN meeting was held in Geneva. It was the first since the global body's top rights official released a report in 2022 saying the detention of Uyghurs and other Muslims in the Xinjiang region may constitute crimes against humanity. China, remember, has been accused of state-sponsored camps, government policies of forced labor, suppression of Uyghur religious practices, forced sterilization, forced contraception, and forced abortion among the community. There are many who also suggest that since 2017, some 16,000 Uyghur mosques have been razed or damaged, and hundreds of thousands of children have been forcibly separated from their parents. In fact, Chinese government statistics itself also reports that from 2015 to 2018, birth rates in the mostly Uyghur regions of Hotan and Kashgar fell by more than 60%. Now, at this United Nations meeting, out of about 163 countries, which had 45 seconds each to put across their point, most Western countries like the US, UK, and Germany chided Beijing for its treatment of the Xinjiang Uyghurs, as well as for restrictions in Hong Kong and the occupation of Tibet. Ambassador Leslie Norton of Canada urged China to end enforced disappearances targeting human rights defenders, ethnic minorities, and Falun Gong practitioners. Falun Gong is a spiritual movement in the country. Kozo Honsai, Japan's deputy permanent representative in Geneva, called for better protection of the rights of minorities in Tibet. China's ally Russia advised it to consistently improve the understanding and capacity of citizens to use standard spoken and written Chinese in Xinjiang. Frankie Brownwind-Levy, Political Affairs Counselor for South Africa, called on China to strengthen an anti-domestic violence law passed 8 years ago. India, meanwhile, gave China 3 recommendations on ensuring human rights, measures to promote gender equality, and working on the realization of the aspirations of developing countries. However, there were those who supported China in what they called its progress. Iran praised China's National Action Plan for Human Rights. Ethiopia, Cameroon, Bhutan, and Vietnam lauded China's efforts on human rights and the work that China has done in ensuring that no violation takes place. China, meanwhile, stressed on the progress in poverty eradication, democratic elections, and the freedom of religious belief being safeguarded in the country. So as we see it, the world stands divided on the violations, the accusation of the violations of human rights that take place in China and elsewhere in its occupied territories. To talk more on this, I'm joined by Tenzin Sundut. He's a Tibetan writer and activist. I'm also joined by Pathikrit Payne, Geo-Political Analyst. Both of you gentlemen, good evening. Namaskar. Thank you very much for speaking with Mirror Now. Tenzin, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of this review meeting that has happened at the United Nations on the human rights being violated in China? The world stands divided. We are seeing differing views by countries. But as a Tibetan, what do you think of it?
Well, it's for the first time that there are 20 countries who are for the first time speaking directly, criticizing the human rights violations that China has been doing on Tibet and East Turkestan, and most importantly, the human rights violations that is happening within China. And this is unprecedented. The previous UPR meeting that happened in 2018, at that time, there were hardly more than 10. But now the number has come to 20, which is a good sign of development that people have now started to speak up, and not only about political repression, but most importantly on human rights. And Tibetans who have been undergoing tremendous pressure and particularly genocide happening in my country, Tibet, and also in East Turkestan. This is it's a welcome step. But the international community must do more and especially keep business aside. And when it comes to issue of human rights, they must squarely make China accountable to the violations China is doing within China and in China's occupied countries like Tibet and East Turkestan and southern Mongolia. While I say this, I have to inform that more than 1 million Tibetan children today are suffering under China's what is called colonial boarding school, where children from the age of 3, 4, 5, right up to age of 18 have been forcibly kept in Chinese schools run in Tibet, where they have been deprived to receive Tibetan value education, Tibetan tradition and culture, and especially Tibetan language education. They are now being given Chinese language education,
But you know,
and
Tenzin, China defends it,
we
saying that
stutter.
boarding school is something that children across the world go to, and what's the harm in that? We're just sending Tibetan children to boarding schools. It's a system of education.
These Chinese colonial boarding schools are specially created by the Chinese government. There are no private schools in Tibet. There are no schools run by monasteries or private individuals. All these private schools have been shut down, and all the schools in Tibet today are run by the Chinese Communist Party. And there, the medium of education has now been turned into Chinese. And just imagine what would happen in the next 5, 10 years when these Tibetan children grow up in their own country speaking and knowing only Chinese language. So this is homogenizing factor that China is trying to do to make entire China and China's occupied countries as Chinese. This dictatorial and assimilative technique is to homogenize China, and this is perhaps the last effort China is doing to completely homogenize and
Okay.
destroy Tibetan religion, culture, and the values that we have been keeping for hundreds and thousands of years. And it's happening in Tibet, East Turkestan, which is a
All
Muslim
right.
country, and in southern Mongolia.
Okay. Pathikrit, you know, from the likes of it, from what we saw in that UN meeting, 45 seconds were given to each country to voice their opinion on the human rights status in China. But many of them, on expected lines, it was the West which was chiding Beijing for the violations. But there were many who actually praised the kind of work that China says that it is doing in ensuring that human rights are not violated. And those countries include countries from the African continent, countries like Bhutan, countries like Vietnam. Clearly, do you also feel the fact that it has less to do with what is happening in China and with Uyghur Muslims and more to do with the geopolitical equations that are currently at display and at play in the world?
Good evening, Shreya, and good evening, Tenzin. See, let me tell you, there are 155 countries which are part of Belt and Road Initiative. Many of them are in debt trap, so they don't want to antagonize China. There are countries like, which are bordering China. They have border disputes with them. They don't want to antagonize China. There are countries like Russia. There are countries like Iran on whom such disproportionately high level of sanctions that have been imposed by the West, led by United States, that these countries have very little option but to go into the arms of China. That's the reason why many of these countries have spoken or speak generally in favor of China. But the hypocrisy and the double standard goes beyond this. Even those countries which are speaking against China, especially the countries of West, Shreya, what have they done in the last 1 decade on this issue? What have they done on the issue of origin of COVID virus in Wuhan? What has been the role of WHO or other multilateral institutions, including United Nations? What have they done in terms of investigation? Where is that investigation report? Let me give you some data. The trade between China and European Union is $856 billion. The trade between United States and China is $758 billion. None of them want to antagonize China beyond a point because it would have devastating impact on their market, on their companies which have completely outsourced manufacturing to China. And in an election year in United States, even though certain restrictions have been imposed on certain companies which operate in Xinjiang province, beyond that, the Biden administration or whether the Trump administration will not do anything. The only reason that they have something called an entity list which puts a list of companies on from China and other countries with whom you have restriction, they have restriction in terms of trade, is because they fear that the Chinese companies will steal their technology, critical technology, not because of human rights issue. So let me tell you, the hypocrisy is
Okay, which is
more about
also
those
clearly
who are today
nobody really
criticizing
truly
China.
genuinely cares about. Yeah, nobody truly actually cares about what is
Yeah,
happening in China, and it's more to do with that. Also, the kind of investments that you see in the African continent as well, the Chinese investments there as well. That's why countries like Ethiopia and Cameroon not wanting to have that sort of tension with China. But Tenzin, like Pathikrit said, is there a certain kind of disappointment as well when you see global bodies not doing enough to call out and pull up China in terms of the kind of human rights violations, allegations that it is constantly and regularly accused of?
Well, I can understand what Pratikrit is saying when everything has been brought down to just quantifying business and various other things, and therefore look at human rights. But look at the small country like Estonia or Lithuania or Czech Republic. These are countries. They have every
Hmm.
reason to fear China's backlash. At the same time, when it comes to human rights, they have spoken up, and these are great examples. I am myself as angry that the international community, when it comes to trade, there is one policy. When it comes to human rights, it is important for them to speak up, and some countries have done that, and I congratulate them.
Hmm.
While I do not hope to see that this is going to completely change the politics in China, but it is good news that
Hmm.
some people
Hmm.
are taking the risk in raising issues like this. And India has also raised their voice at the United Nations
Yeah.
this time. But when it comes to issue of Tibet, I hope that India will continue to raise issues on Tibet also.
Hmm. Okay. Pathikrit, last question to you. When we talk about China's dead diplomacy, it's no surprise that there are several countries, like you also mentioned, that have been stuck in it. And in that context, Pathikrit, the kind of stance that the new Maldivian government has taken, we see. Do you see that also happening with the Maldives in the near future?
Shreya, Maldives is already in a debt trap. I think leaders like Muizu are the ones that China cultivate to do their bidding. Muizu might be a temporary leader. He might go. We don't know when, but maybe soon enough. But he has completely put his country into a trap. And the Chinese generally prefer proxies like him. Countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka,
Hmm.
of course, Pakistan, they've all burned their fingers. But they have taken already, like some Muizu have taken so much from China that it is difficult for him to, deny or oppose China anything. So you might see China even trying to take over certain
Hmm.
islands, or even ensure that Maldives is in no position to say anything to China. So I think Maldives is going the
Hmm.
same path where Sri Lanka has gone, and Maldives perhaps is already in a huge trap. They will
Hmm.
lose their business with India. They've lost all kinds of goodwill with India. So it's not surprising for me. Shreya, I would still say that I'm more surprised by the
Hmm.
countries which have the capacity to counter. You talk about European Union and United States; they don't even work on creation of a
Hmm.
resilient supply chain, so that their dependence on China for goods and services and finished products and
Yeah.
semi-finished products and raw materials come down. They don't do anything. So let me tell you what would happen. They talk
Hmm.
this year, next year they'll
Hmm.
talk
Hmm.
again. The next to next year they'll talk again. So every year they come, they discuss, and they disappear, only to come back next year to talk. So that is the reality.
Hmm.
Even World Health Organization. Tell me, what have they done with COVID, origin of
Hmm.
COVID
So
in Wuhan? Where is that report? So let me tell you, I would still, I can understand
yeah.
smaller countries and their compulsion. What I don't understand is the hypocrisy of larger countries. So far as Maldives
Yeah.
is concerned, it's a gone case. But you know what I believe, Muizu is already a rich man with considerable amount of money somewhere in offshore banking. But it's the people of Maldives who would suffer. But that's a consequence they have to face for the choices they have made. I think India has already taken a
Yeah,
stand.
and that's a
Let me tell
conscious
you last
decision
point.
that the Maldives and countries like Maldives have to take. Yeah, quickly, 20 seconds, Pathikrit, and then I wrap this up.
I think India is one of the very few countries working on a resilient supply chain. He's trying to decouple. Even something like TikTok is not banned in United States. So what do we expect out of United States and its stand against China? That's my question.
All right. All right. I'll have to wrap it up here. Tenzin, apologies. I have paucity of time. To you and to Pathikrit, thank you.
I just want to say
both of
it's
you
a
for
small
joining us
victory
on the
and
broadcast.
it's a good step.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. For Tenzin and people like Tenzin who've been voicing for Tibetan cause, it is indeed a ray of light that has come in, with countries at least speaking up and calling out China on its alleged human rights violations. But we'll have to see how this really pans out.